during this study of First John, listening to Dave, talk about it and go through it, there's this one thing that kept popping in my mind, and God said, do something with this, do something with it. I'm like, okay, cool. And it was the word light. Okay? So y'all know my lessons. I do a lot of science. I do a lot of delving into that because that's how I see the universe. That's how I see God through the universe. And I've talked about this before. I don't see God in a robe. I see God in a lab coat. Okay? So for me, He is controlling the universe. And the bigger we gain on knowledge and see about the universe, the more you start realizing there is a lot of construct, there is a lot of control. If we can mathematically describe something, that is fascinating to me, and we get it accurately, even though we're fairly young as a civilization, let's be honest. But that kind of helps people like me see that He's behind there, that He's controlling and constructing, and that something was in design there. So that's part of where this is going. So we're going to look at light itself, and it's a miracle. It really is. And I hope by the end of this that, one, you're not bored, but two, that you get a fascination with how precious a miracle light is. And so it's kind of neat, okay? So we'll look at parts of this. There will be some science to it. There will be some math, a little bit, not much, so don't run out of the room. But there are some things you need to understand about light. We do take it for granted. We really do. We walk into our bedroom, we turn on a light switch, and boom, no more darkness. Okay? And at no point in human history have we had this much control of light. If you look at the Bible, there's so many passages about, man, if you run out of oil and you're left in the dark, gnashing and gnawing of teeth, being left in the dark, you wouldn't take your lamp and put a basket over it. That's their light source at the time. That's what kept darkness out. Now, we can even turn on lights anywhere we want. We can remotely do it. We can beam it out. I wish I had my laser pointer. A laser pointer itself is just light and a beam. And they spent tremendous amount of money and time and science and effort to make a device that we now today play with our pets. Huge implications for applications for military and science and research, and I play with my dog with them, with a little laser pointer. We are in the most control of light than we've ever had, and yet we take it for granted. We just walk into that room and assume, boop, light goes on, and we don't have to worry about darkness. But we got to remember, spiritually, we do. Well, here's a few things about it. One, it is the universal speed limit. Nothing with mass can go faster than the speed of light. And we'll talk about some of those implications as well. But the cool part about that is that wasn't really discovered until the early 1900s, with people like Maxwell and Einstein, who started delving into all these properties of stuff, and they kept coming across this speed limit and then speed limit, and nothing can go faster than the speed of light. And you could try, but you can't. And it really threw people off for a while until they started proving it. And sure enough, they did. Even more recently, there's something called a gravitational wave. I don't know if you've seen it in the news a lot. There's several research facilities that have measured this. And sure enough, the speed of gravity is the speed of light. Like, it interacts at the speed of light. And so that was a huge discovery. They'd assumed it, but they finally nailed it down. They did it and they observed it. So it's everywhere, and it's kind of fascinating with that. That's why I call it the universal speed limit. We use it for measuring distant objects. We talk about light years. That is a distance, not a time per se. Weird part is it's massless. Light has these properties about it, but it has no mass. And that gets even more complicated. I won't dive into that one too much, but they do have abilities to use light in a way that has, quote, momentum, but it has no mass. And that's really confusing, but fun. A weird part about it is it's both a particle and a wave at the same time. We have something called a photon, and we have a wave. And it exists in both states until you do something with it, until you either interact with it, and you want a photon, you're like, hey, I got me a photon. Yay. Or I want a wave, and you just leave it alone, and it stays as a wave. That one took a lot of convincing in the science world when Einstein and others started really pushing it. that it exists in both. And you could do experiments now, even in high school, to prove it, and it's kind of fun. It's called a double slit experiment. If you're interested at all, do a little research. It's fascinating that light can be both at the same time. It's really bizarre. It can be separated into bands, which we call a rainbow, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But no other area of the electromagnetic spectrum does that. And God gave us that. We know that passage, and we'll look at it. But he said, here, I'll give you this rainbow and have fun with it, you know. And so that's kind of fascinating. There are non-visible parts to light, infrared and UV. Infrared being heat. UV is what burns us when we're out in the sun too long, okay? Damages our skin cells. And we could use it to study star compositions. That'll be another fun one at some point, but we'll look at our stars, some of its visual spectrums, and it's kind of fascinating that the sun emits more than what we see, which I find fascinating, that there's something to the sun that's even more than we knew about until fairly recently. All right, yeah, Einstein, one of his funnier pictures. The speed of light is exactly 299,792,458 meters per second. That's it. That's its definition. That's the speed of light. That amount of speed, you can send a laser beam, and researchers do this, to the moon and back in 2.6 seconds, approximately. Okay? And what they did was during the Apollo era, and I believe a little bit later, they dropped off these prismatic reflectors so that they can send laser beams at the moon, bounce it back, and see if the moon's moving away from us. And it is at about 2 centimeters a year. So we'll lose it in a few billion years or something. But that's the speed. But it's only that speed in a vacuum. So in here it's a little bit slower because it's running into air particles and everything else. This is a bit of the math. But being a constant, it has two properties, wavelengths and frequency. So these lights here, typical fluorescent lights, have 3 color bands, red, green, and blue. And when you combine them, we get kind of a white. And they adjust it a little bit to give you an orange glow type or yellow or bright white. They now have LED ones that do the same thing. But it's not a perfect white light. But the fascinating part about that was Einstein's equation on E equals mc squared. We've heard that one. We've seen it. It's the simplified form. There is a lot more complicated form, but this is what Einstein did. He made it simple enough that people can grasp some of it. All this thing is saying is, if you were to take your mass and convert it to energy instantly, the whole thing, you would have a thermonuclear event, multiply it by that constant, and that's how much energy you are sitting here. Thankfully, we're stable energy. We're not blowing up. But why I turn this one around is that if light is a constant, then that means the ratio of my energy to mass is also a constant. It doesn't change, which is kind of fascinating. You know, like his insight into energy and mass and all this is just absolutely fascinating. And that's why I love to dig into those, because that C keeps popping up everywhere. It is the universal max speed, because you can never reach it. And there's some fascinating equations out there to show you that. But it's basically, the closer you get to the speed of light, if you could, your mass becomes more massive. It kind of gains mass to everybody around you. And you're like, okay, well, if I have more mass, then I need more force. Okay, I give it more force, I get a little bit faster, but I become more massive, which then requires more force, and you end up tending towards infinite mass, which is weird. But that's why. That's why we can't travel that fast. No matter how much teenagers really want to, they can't. You know, we just don't have that ability. But that's a fascinating thing. Again, not something that was widely known until the early 1900s. This is why. This is the equation. A little ugly, but not too bad. What I want to concentrate on is this guy right there. That's your velocity. So the faster you go, the closer this gets to 1. If you could reach the speed of light, this goes to 1. So then you got 1 minus 1 is 0. See, basic math. Square root of 0 is 0. And you end up dividing 1 by 0, which means you just reached infinity. Which is weird. It's weird concept to think about. But if you could reach the speed of light with mass, you've reached infinity, which means we can't. It also affects your time and your width. If I was running this way with my spaceship at the speed of light, I get shorter and shorter and shorter until I become infinitely thin. Time stops. There's all kinds of weird implications the closer you get to the speed of light. I know, it's a whole lot of weird information, but we just can't do it. We can't reach that. Now, there is an interesting discussion in the science community. This question pops up quite a bit. The universe is insanely large. I mean, it's hard for us to fathom how large the universe is. And they're asking, well, if the universe is so big, why is the speed of light so small? And you're thinking, well, that's huge. That thing was enormous. It's a big number. Except it's not compared to our universe. And so it's been a very fascinating question. Why that short limit? Why that low limit? Because it takes, if a star is 10,000 light years from here, it takes 10,000 years for that light to get here. That's it. So they're asking, why is that limit? What's controlling that limit? And so there's some pretty deep questions. And when you think about it, you're like, this universe is huge, but it takes forever to get energy across it. And there's parts of the universe we will never see because that energy will never get to us because of the speed of light. So kind of think about that, like how powerful that light switch is when you go into your room and turn it on. That things like this are going on at the same time. So I told you light year is a distance, and that's what they call it. They also have light months, light days, light seconds. It's the amount of distance light will travel in a year, which is 5.88 trillion miles. So you think about that. That's a huge number. That's why light from our sun to the earth takes about 8 minutes, 20 seconds. So if anything happened to the sun, like it burst out a bunch of light energy to us, it takes a little over 8 minutes to get to us. Much less getting it outside the solar system. Much less getting to the next star like Alpha Centauri. That takes 4.35 light years to get to there, or from there to us. So if we wanted to communicate with somebody there, it would take 4.5 years, 4 1/3 years to send information. So then we started looking at, okay, what's the farthest galaxy? So you're talking, or closest galaxy, my apologies, 25,000 light years. Well, that was before our civilization even began as a human population. So that light coming from Canis Major was before us as a civilization, which is kind of fascinating. And then you get to Icarus, 5 billion light years away from us. So it takes 5 billion years. Well, that, in theory, is before our solar system existed. So the light we're seeing is older than us as a solar system. And parts of it. We can argue that part of it. And then lastly, this is farthest galaxy, is 13.3 billion light years. Talking, if you buy the old universe theories, that's looking at the beginning of the universe. Close to it, a few billion, or about 500 million off. That's the light we see. And that's what we keep digging in deeper. We're looking farther and farther away. We're picking up light in ways that we've never been able to. The Hubble telescope has been phenomenal. But the next one coming up, which is called the James Webb telescope, will make it look like a backyard observatory. We'll be able to see even deeper into the reaches of the universe, places that we've never even thought we could, if they can get it off the ground. It's been a lot of controversy with that one. But this kind of gives you a scale of what light is like in our universe. But we get into the properties of it. It is electromagnetic radiation. It has both electricity and magnetic fields. Weirdly, they're perpendicular to each other. So magnetic fields are doing this. Light waves are doing this. It's coming through the electricity. It is 400 to 700 nanometers for visible light. So that's kind of a weird number, but that's the range of it. That's what we can see visually. I put that Roy G. Biv backwards because it is backwards. Yes?
Roy G. Biv?
Biv. Red, orange, yellow, green. I'm sorry, blue, green, yeah. Green, blue, indigo, violet, right? Except that's in reverse order to wavelength. So if you read it the right way, or the way we've always been taught, this is 700 down to 400, which I think it causes a lot of confusion. So I wrote it backwards to make it more confusing. But that's the visual spectrum. That's what we see. And it's the only electromagnetic field that seems to naturally separate into what we call a rainbow. Now, we know the passage. We're going to look at a part of it. But rainbows are pretty fascinating. You can create one with a simple prism. That's what you're seeing there. You can create it with water. You can create it with your water hose. If you get a nice spray going, like a mist, and you look at it, you can actually see the rainbow. And there's something important about that biblically and spiritually for us. Interestingly enough, what people call double rainbows. Who's ever seen a double rainbow? Okay, next time you do, look at the second rainbow. It actually isn't a rainbow. It's called a glory, which is a fascinating word, that it's called a glory, but it's a reflection of the first one. So if you look at it very closely, you'll see the first one's really bright. It'll be like red to violet, right? But if you look at the second one called a glory, it's actually violet to red. It's a reflection of the original. So take a look at it sometime. When you see a double, you look at it, you're like, oh wow, it is a reflection of the first one. And it's not a true rainbow, it's a reflection, which is kind of fun. That's why it's also as dim too. It's a little bit more dim. So look for that. But again, it's called a glory. I always love sharing that. There are two areas of the spectrum that we don't see. We don't have that ability, UV and infrared. But what's fascinating is many animals do. When I was researching wine grapes up in Lubbock area, it always fascinated me that the birds knew when to come and get grapes. I mean, within a day, I'm about to pick them because they're almost at their right ripeness, and they'll come through and eat them all. I suspect that they're able to see, and they are able to see in the infrared and UV spectral areas outside of us, down in here and up there. I think it's reflecting a different color. And they're like, oh, those are ready. So animals adapted to that. You know, they're like, hey, that one's glowing differently. I think it's ready. And sure enough, they'll see it. Yes, sir?
Yeah, it's like raccoons know when the peaches arrive.
Seriously?
Yeah.
They do. And they'll come and just...
That peach tree will be falling off, and the next morning it's gone.
It's gone. And a lot of animals are that way. They may be able to see differently. If you ever want to have some creepy fun, depends on your perspective. If you get a hold of a UV light, go outside at night and shine it around, especially in the summer. Scorpions glow in UV. They glow like a blue to a purple, sometimes even a white. That's how a lot of people who are hunting for scorpions, they go and find them as they take a UV light and walk around. They glow differently, which is fascinating because we can't see it. We can't see it at all, which is weird. Dung beetle, they did a study on them. You know how they roll the ball behind them backwards and they're taking it somewhere to hide it? They actually put little blinders on above their eyes and they got lost. So they started figuring out they use stars. They use the light of the stars to navigate as a little bug down here. So that's what fascinates me, is we can't see what a lot of animals can. And so what does the world look like to them, you know? Like, what does it look like to a raccoon's eyes and their cones and their perspectives? What do they see, you know? There's a mantis shrimp, only sees in one color, you know, kind of thing. It's just fascinating when you start digging into animals and their visual spectral that they can see. But that's the main part right there. That's us. That's what we get to see is the rainbow. But is it significant? And the reality is, in the universe, no. If we could see in these other bands, the universe actually glows in background gamma radiation. That's what they study to look at how old the universe is. When we look out in the stars and we see just little pinpricks, or maybe the Milky Way if you're lucky, the rest of that blackness is actually glowing in different wavelengths. If we could see that, we would be blinded. Our eyes would be so confused. Our brain wouldn't know what to do with it. We could always tease George if we see him again. He's not technically blind. He just has difficulty picking up information in that area. That's it. His visual is out. But what he picks up on and what him and I have fun with is over here. You're transmitting radio waves, amateur radio operator. That's what he does. He transmits on those wavelengths up there. And so he gathers more information in other spectrums, and we can control it. This, if you ever had an X-ray, that's where it exists. It's smaller wavelengths, it's higher energy, which is why it passes through us, but not so much as bone. We get into that UV area where we get our sunburns. That's why we have UV blockers. If you ever gone into a restaurant that has one of those heat lamps, or if you ever raised chickens, you have a heat lamp, that's the infrared. So just give it a little glow so you know it works. Otherwise, they wouldn't need the glow. They could just be emitting infrared. Here's a fascinating little fact. Microwaves. Microwave your lunch, your water, or whatever you're eating. You ever notice that you can look through the door and see your food? Yeah. It's because the visual wavelengths are smaller than the microwave. So they put little holes in the screen on the front that keeps the microwave in but lets light out, which lets you just get to see your food. That's what those little holes are about. It keeps all the microwave radiation in. And so you're not getting blasted with it, which is another fascinating historical thing. They discovered microwave by accident on the early TVs. So they didn't have a screen on the early TVs on the tube, and a guy was standing in front of it looking at it, and his chocolate bar in his pocket started melting. Which means he was getting hit with microwave radiation, and that early, don't get too close, it might hurt your eyes. It probably was true for the early TVs. And then he turned around and made it into a microwave, and now we've got microwave ovens, okay? But that's because of the wavelengths, Your little FM radio, you probably came in this morning listening to a song, listening to music. That's in that range right there. And you keep going up and up and up. I say this because if you think about it, our visual spectrum is such a tiny portion of this that it is a miracle that we were given light to see. When God said, "Let there be light," that's what he turned on, that little bitty spectrum. Not much left in there. But if you could see in these ranges, our earth would be chaotic. It's hard to explain, but we have so much radio waves out there, from television to phone to radio to wireless. Anything we've got in here, it's all transmitting in radio waves. If we could see that, it would just be a mess. Like we couldn't make sense of it. You'd be technically blinded by all of that information coming in. But instead, God gave us what? This little bitty sliver to see the universe by. Yes, sir?
Do you think that any of that does anything to our minds?
They've done a number of studies, and it depends on what frequency you're talking about. But what they look at is how deep it penetrates skin, right? And most frequencies, no, they don't go through. There are some you do have to be careful of. Again, in the amateur radio world, you can transmit on up into the gigahertz. We're talking like up in here kind of thing. And it's called ionizing radiation. It could cause cancer if you stood in front of it too much. You could basically cook a turkey at 50 yards, or burn it kind of thing, depending on how much your power output is. But that's the key, is the power output. Most frequencies don't pass well through us. We attenuate them, which typically is why skin cancers. Our body absorbs it quite a bit. But I don't know that it does. They have, what was that research I saw? I forget what frequency they were using, but they were able to transmit into the brain, but it was very close. It had to be very close. And they were manipulating some of the feelings and thoughts with those frequencies. But it was targeted at a certain area. But for the most part, you're just absorbing it right on your surface. And that's how they do it. That's part of the study, is how deep does it go into tissue. Thankfully, not much. And most of our Wi-Fi routers, anyway, they dial back their power. If they don't need to be at high power, they dial back. And so you get your signal, but you don't have to worry about it. Same with your cell phones. They're smart enough now that if they can get to a tower easily, they dial back their power. But if you ever notice you've been way out in the middle of nowhere and your battery drains faster, it's because it's pumped up the power trying to hit a tower again. And so a lot of the smart technologies dial it back, thankfully. I will say the skin cancer aspect is probably more of a concern. Just being in proximity to it a long time would probably do something, but it depends on the power output too. Good question. So, this kind of gives you an idea of our universe. We are chock full of electromagnetic radiation. It's everywhere. Thankfully for us, our Earth has a magnetic field, which protects us, which is what causes the aurora borealises, or the borealises, but the aurora borealis in the northern hemisphere. Those are cosmic rays interacting with our magnetic field and charging up in the atmosphere. Well, be thankful for that, because otherwise, without that magnetic field, we would get baked, which is part of what you have to worry about going to Mars. You know, we're trying to send people to Mars. They've got to be careful of this radiation because it could impact you, and it's all in that area. It's just different wavelengths. This is a fun one. Sunlight quilt, or our sun's quilt, basically. Our sun emits different frequencies all the time, different wavelengths. And so somebody took all these images, there's like 20 or 30 images, and then sliced it up and then kind of stitched them together to where you could see it. And it's happening all the time. So all we were given was the ability to see between 400 and 700 nanometers. That's it. That's what we were blessed with, because if everything else was visible to us, I don't know how we would see the universe anymore. You know, can't even imagine what it would look like. But this is kind of cool. We are in a new solar cycle. It's a lot more active this time around, which is good and bad. You'll see some of your radio waves aren't coming through as well, so sometimes your radio doesn't behave the way it normally would. You can blame the sun, solar flares and that kind of stuff. All right, so now into the biblical aspect. And I throw this up there because this is one of those two-sided coin things. I have the shirt very similar to this, and I always thought it was fun because I could wear it on Fridays, and I got to wear the word God into the classroom, which was a ton of fun. Anytime you could sneak it in there. But it had math on there, so nobody questioned it. So as a math and science teacher, I got away with it. It was fun. But some people use this as oh, well, you know, I'm agnostic, I'm atheist. You know, this is what I believe God would have said, you know. And I'm like, well, maybe he did. Maybe God speaks in mathematics. Maybe he speaks in science terms. I don't know. All I know is he speaks to me in English if I'm lucky. You know what I mean? Otherwise, it's in tongues, right? That's kind of the idea. But this is kind of the properties of light in a higher math form, which is kind of fun. And so some people throw this out there like, oh, yeah, well, this is what he said. Maybe he did. Maybe you're right. But at least you're willing to think that God could exist. So let there be light, right? Well, in Genesis, then God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. It's always a fascinating passage because he says, here's your light. Here's this little sliver of the spectrum I'm going to give you so you can see the world around you and see my beauty, see my creation, see my world, see my universe. And he said, there it is. And he saw that it was good. When God says that, yay. When he sees a ministry that is good, awesome. But the weird one to me is he separated the light from the dark. Now there's a big discussion. Do you take Genesis literally or as a literary thing? If you take this literally, there was a time in our universe where light and dark existed together. You walk into a room, turn on the lights, the darkness didn't go. It stayed. Right? And he says, nope, I'm going to separate you. I'm so powerful. I'm going to take these two things and I'm going to, so that you either have light or you have darkness. So the other day in our office, one of the lights went out. Boom. I couldn't do anything about it. Put in a ticket, electrician came and fixed it. But the darkness stayed because that light was broken. Okay? But if you take it as a literary stance, God says, I see both the light and the darkness. I see them together, and I'm going to force them to not be able to be together. And we see that spiritually. You can't be a sinner and be with God. That's what we've been hearing. You are a sinner, but if you choose to continue to sin and go against God's will, you're not as close to God as you would want to be, right? It's difficult. Before I was saved, I was not with God. I was eternally separated from him because I was lost. Got saved, moved on with life, get closer to him. But as we've discussed in here is, which line do you walk on? Do you want to walk on the line that's separating the darkness and the light? You want to, I'm going to toe it. I'm going to walk right on the edge. I'm going to balance like Dave talks about. Or do you want to be closer to the light source? And we're going to look at some of those passages. But again, either way you want to look at Genesis, literal or literary, he separated the two. So they can't exist together. And that's very important when we get to Revelation. So beginning to end, right? Alpha and Omega. So a little bit of background. When I was looking at words, I get fascinated with words and what they were in the beginning. In the Hebrew, you're looking at or, light, light of the day, light of the heavenly luminaries. I love that phrase right there, heavenly luminaries. That's just their word they used to talk about light. And they talked about light from on earth all the way up into the universe, right? And daybreak, dawn, morning light, that's what it was. So they would, we've all been up early. We sit there and watch the sunrise. That is such a beautiful thing. And we look forward to it, right? But I also love a good sunset. And lately the sunsets have been really gorgeous because we have some smoke in the sky or the air, and it starts interacting, and we get these oranges and purples and glows, and it's just fun to watch. It's just kind of makes you feel awesome seeing it. Seeing a solar eclipse. There's one coming up in a couple of years. It's going to pass over Fredericksburg. We will have a full solar eclipse, so expect a lot of craziness here. People coming in to see it, view it. It'll be fascinating. Those are awesome to watch too, because it reminds us that the sun can be blotted out almost perfectly by our moon, and remind us like, ooh, I'm not in control of anything. Yeah. So the Greek word, phos or phos, okay? Same word as phosphorescent, which is a type of lighting, okay? It's also phosphorus because it lights up in a unique way. Light emitted by a lamp. You're talking about carrying the oil lamps. Okay, that's what they're looking at. So anytime you see the word light in the New Testament, that's what you're seeing is phos. Star, a fire, a lamp, a torch, anything like that. Anything with brightness. So kind of a bigger definition of any kind of source of light, which is kind of fascinating. Okay, so Genesis 9:16 through 17. When the rainbow is in the cloud, then I will look at it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. Here's a reminder. Now, to an agnostic or an atheist, non-believer, they just look at it as a refraction of light through a prismatic, medium that separates it into the, 7 bands that we look at, da 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 da. But God said, no, my people, if you see a rainbow, remember my covenant. Remember me and what I've done for you, or what I'm not going to do next time around, right? That was part of the promise in the covenant. But he gave us that rainbow. And, I'm sure there's discussion with that. There's some that say this was the first time it rained on earth. I'm more of the camp that, God went over there and flipped the switch and gave light the property to be broken up into 7 bands. I don't know. I don't know how he did it, or what he did, or when he did it. But he gave us the rainbow as a reminder. So don't forget that. He said, this is my covenant to all flesh on earth. Think of me when you see a rainbow. Kind of fascinating. But again, only in that small segment of all of the electromagnetic radiation in the universe do we get this. Because he wanted to bless us with it. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. I always love those because it's telling God, your words to me do 2 things. Number 1 is a lamp to my feet. You ever walk around in the dark? Stumble over something? I've done it. It's a lamp to my feet so I know where I stand. And 2, it lights my path. So if you think about that, it's not only about where I'm standing and what I'm walking on, it's where I'm headed. I know my path because of your word. It is a light, it's a lamp to give me my path. So in that little phrase right there, You get two perspectives, where you're standing and where you're headed. And it's His Word that guides us. So keep that in mind. That is always something to keep in your heart. That even in times of darkness, like right now, everything's crazy. From government to COVID to families to our lack of family cohesion, all of it. Like the whole world is brr. Yet, your Word is a light to my feet and my path. That's it. That's all we got to worry about. So yes, definitely pray for those who need it. But remember, where you're standing, He's your guiding light. This is a message we have heard from Him and announced to you, that God is light, and in Him there is no darkness at all. So this is one of those passages in 1 John that we've been studying that kind of got my attention. Like, whoa, hey, this might be kind of a fun study to do. Look up light, look up all these properties and hopefully share some of the excitement of that. It excites me. But God is light. Definitive. Done. It's not maybe, could be, most likely is. God is light. And in Him there is no darkness. Because remember, He knows what darkness looks like. He's separated. He's like, nope, done. There will be no darkness with this light. So that's what John was really concentrating on. If I remember correctly, John uses that word 5 times in this book. And we're going to look at a few of them. But I'd like to figure out where else he used it. He used it in Revelation. We'll look at that one. But I mean, he has this fascination with this idea of light, that God is light. And light is important. It's essential. By the way, if y'all have any thoughts or comments, you could speak up. It's okay.
Well, like light is the way.
Light is the way. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. I know it's life and light, but still, you've got to have that. Yeah, exactly.
Well, and God is light. We, before your study, God is light right there.
Yeah.
But then looking at the possibilities of light, God is so much more than that.
Oh, yeah. And it's all in Him. Yeah. And it's weird. And no darkness. No darkness. Which means it's emitting everywhere. Like every part. That's a funny thought. I hadn't even thought about that. When Christ walks in heaven, or God stands in heaven, either way, I mean, all three hanging out up there, and He's standing there, under His feet are no shadows. Like, if you think about that. I just thought about it. That's a weird thought. Sorry. My mind just went, thinking about that. He doesn't cast a shadow under His feet. There's darkness right under my feet right now. Because I'm not emitting light. It's weird. I hadn't thought about that. 1 John 1:7. But if we walk in the light as He Himself is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus Christ cleanses us from all sin. The one word that would cause me to always be concerned is the if. If we're walking in the light. If we're walking in God. Sorry, that's my toes, not y'all's. You always have to ask, if. But if you are, we have fellowship with one another. That's awesome. Because of the light, we can have fellowship with one another. Even if that other drives you crazy. Even if that other annoys you. But we can have fellowship. That's what causes us to be the light and salt of the earth, is that we need to be interacting with others so that the light can shine through us. It's not our light. It's God. But we could share it. And that's what I would love to see in more politics, is sharing of light. Get away from all this darkness. Get away from all these arguments, all these complaints, this rage. We're in a time of rage right now that's just, clearly, we're still stuck on that if then. Because I don't see it. But people could be there. There's people that are there that are trying to have fellowship to share the Christ. So, always stumble over the if. 1 John 2, 8 through 10. On the other hand, I am writing a new commandment to you, which is true in him and in you, because the darkness is passing away, and the true light is already shining. The one who says he is in the light and yet hates his brother is in the darkness until now. The one who loves his brother abides in the light, and there is no cause for stumbling in him. So we covered part of that. A lot of people get stuck on, oh, this is a new commandment. But he just said, I don't have a new commandment. Now I do have a new commandment. Don't get caught up in that little loop. More of look in, because the darkness is passing away and the true light is already shining. True light. Not, a lamp that you go and turn on, not a bulb. The true light is already shining. Do you not see it? If you don't see it, hates his brother. So what is he telling you? If you want to abide in the light and see the light and be a part of the light, love your brother. Now, I am curious, I don't know if we delve too deep into this, but what is a brother? Is this brother in Christ? Is this my brother? The one I'm praying for all the time? What are we talking about here? Well, it's probably a part of that same thing as neighbor. Who's your neighbor? Oh, well, they're 2 houses down. They're not really my neighbor. I don't have to worry about them. No, they're your neighbor. They exist on earth with you. We're all neighbors. So, what are we going to do? Have no cause for stumbling. Love your brother, even if it is difficult. Because remember, I was difficult to love before I was saved. I'm still difficult to love. That's okay. But before I was saved, I would have been difficult to love. And yet, people did. People prayed for me. People moved my heart. That's what we need to do. We need to not be stumbling. We need to be sharing. We need to be the beacons and lights to those around us so that this can grow. This can get bigger and bigger. And that's what we need. We need that in our day today. So, something to think about there. Again, comments?
I just had a thought.
Yeah.
People make comments about, there's just something about that person. They just glow. So if God is in us, the Christ is in our heart, I guess we can't help but glow.
Yeah.
If he has no shadow,
Yeah.
we're glowing.
We're glowing. And so here's a question. How do we keep that glow? And I'm asking y'all, what do you do to keep that glow?
Reading the Bible.
Keep reading the Bible? Yeah, excellent.
Stay in prayer and fellowship.
Stay in prayer and fellowship to keep that glow.
Do for others.
Do for others. This time of year is always important for that. There's a lot of people that are going to be financially hurting. They need help. They need food, clothing, shelter. Absolutely. Help others. Bless others. Absolutely. Mind your tongue. That's a whole other study in James. Ma'am? Do what?
I said, let's not get personal.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a whole great study out of James on that, on our words, even as Christians, can be extremely painful, and we don't mean to. Yeah. Well, good. Thank y'all.
So if a star burns out, it takes a long time for the light to quit coming to Earth?
It would. And in fact, in ours, they're doing a lot of studies. Ours is kind of an insignificant star. It's important to us, but universally speaking, it's kind of a medium glow. It's not very big. It's kind of the Goldilocks. It's not too big, not too small, not too hot, not too bright. A few billion years, the theory is that the fusion energy inside the sun will stop pushing out as much, and it will collapse. And when that collapse happens, it'll take 8 minutes for that first burst of light to come out to us. And then because of that going called supernova, it collapses, pushes out all of its own debris and energy and all this plasma to about, I think the last time I saw this was close to Mars. So it'll cook every planet outward, and then it kind of comes back in. So it's fascinating when you read Revelation and you get a sense of that. There is a point where it talks about the fire engulfing the earth. And you're like, ooh. But a lot of them do it. They're watching, are you familiar with the Orion, the nebula, right? Or, I'm sorry, the constellation? If you look at its top left shoulder, or well, it's really his right shoulder, but left to you, you're talking about Betelgeuse. They've been fascinated with it recently because it's dimmed. And they're not sure why it was dimming at the time, but it wasn't as bright. And so they started assuming or theoretically constructing that it was about to go supernova. And we don't know when or what's going to happen, but that will be a very fascinating event because from our perspective, you'll see it go and then it'll dim out and it'll almost go to nothing. So Orion will lose his shoulder. But some of them pretty quick, some of them never do. Some of them are so small they'll never really go supernova. They don't have the energy to do it. They just kind of whip out and go to brown dwarfs. But no, the suns are very, very fascinating. How much energy is out there. I mean, like our sun is 99.8% of our solar system's mass. Like everything in our solar system is concentrated there. So talking about feeling insignificant, we're really not that important to our solar system. But yeah. Okay, so Revelation 22:5. And there will no longer be any night, and they will not have need of the light of the lamp, nor the light of the sun, because the Lord God will illumine them, and they will reign forever and ever. And that's part of what I was talking about a while ago. You're in heaven. There is no darkness. And I take that absolute. There is no shadows. There's no darkness. It's all illumined. It's all light. It's all God, because He is the light. And so I love that word. He will illumine them. He will be their source of light. That's awesome. That's what we got to work towards, right? And we want to take as many people with us to that situation, because in the end, there will be some that will be thrown into the darkness, and they will not have God's light. That's the ultimate, what we consider hell. You know, there's a lot of descriptions of hell. If you've ever read Dante's Inferno, it's the depictions of that. But in reality, the hell is eternal separation from God, to not have His light anymore. Yes, sir.
It's hard for me to concentrate sometimes, but if there's no shadow, there's nothing solid.
There's not any what?
There's nothing solid.
I don't know. Or everything will just be re-emitting His light. All right? Because like I said, I'm standing here on the floor. I know that I've got darkness under my shoes. Like I do, because there's no light. I'm not a light source. And yet, that won't be there. So yeah, we'll have a new body of something. I don't know what it is. But maybe we will be rebroadcasting His light. You know, we'll be His light bulbs in heaven, so to speak. But yeah, no shadows. Kind of a weird thought, isn't it?
When do we sleep?
Right? Well, there is no clock in heaven, so time doesn't exist. So we don't think which is a whole other fun study. I'm going to try to get just the properties of time. But yeah.
You get tired walking around heaven, you know?
Exactly. Maybe the new bodies won't have that restriction. Exactly. But anyway, no. He will illumine them, and they will reign forever and ever. Again, John. I get back to John because he uses this word light, this illumination, this brightness, this glow that exists. So, kind of fascinating where he ends up with that. All right, so, kind of done an odd study, I agree. Lots of math, lots of science, lots of graphs. All really to help you understand that light has some unique properties. Very unique. Such that we're blessed by them. Okay? We could see things. Yet it's not that significant in the universe. It's only little pinpricks that we can see. Little dots, little stars. If you're lucky, you can get a telescope and you look at a galaxy. But the rest of the universe is glowing in wavelengths and frequencies that we can't see, thankfully. We're also blessed by the fact that if the universe didn't have light sources like that, we would be in darkness all the time. We would have nothing to see in the skies. That would be terrible. I love dark skies. I love the dark skies around here. But it is essential to us. We need light. We need it for energy. We need it to see. We need it for heat. We need it to, do photosynthesis so we can eat. We need it. We can't live without the light. Plants alone. But, if you eat what eats plants, guess what? You still need light. But remember, God is the light. He is the source of all of that. He is our glow. And it exists within us. We need His light and His love. We do. It is essential to us. That's how people come to a certain point in their life that they realize they need God. And they could see it, and then they glow differently. They do. They do. And if the light is in us, we share it. That's why I often pray, let us be beacons and lights. Let us be the salt and the light of the earth. Because if we don't, who will? Yes, ma'am.
So why is there so many philosophers and scientists that are trying to prove that God did not create?
It's a good question. It's like that resistance. And you can see it in Revelation when there's thousands and thousands that no matter how much pain, how much suffering they go through, they still deny and curse God. No matter what miracles they saw, their blinders are on. Quite often, it comes down to the ego that, you know what, I'm smart enough to make my own decisions. I don't need a God to tell me what to do. You resist it and you say, I've even seen some professors, I need to see more evidence. Well, you're kind of in the wrong realm if you're looking for evidence of God. Because quite often, you may not. He was absent between the Old Testament and New Testament for 400 years. No words. So there's that's why you see a lot of the false prophets and a lot of false teachings coming out of it, because there's no word. And so you get that kind of mindset. You get, well, you know what? I'm smart enough to see how the universe works. I don't need God. Why would you believe in some fairy tale, some fantasy? I've got this. And so there's a lot of that. Sometimes it's anger. Sometimes it's frustration. Sometimes it's like, I've taken all this loss. How can there be a God if there's such turmoil in our world? How could he be this God of love when there's so much rage this year? Well, guess what? This isn't the first time. But that's kind of my thoughts. I've been around some people that just wouldn't believe. There was a guy named John. He didn't believe for the longest time. He was that agnostic, atheist type. And then one day he's looking through a microscope at a cell. And God said, you see that? That's my beauty. And his eyes were opened with a microscope. And it was a fascinating testimony. But because of looking at the complication of a cell, he saw God finally and changed his heart. So, kind of neat stories like that. But yeah, that'd be my guess. Mostly ego.
Sometimes feeling is more real than seeing.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got all these senses for a reason. God gave us all of them.
Exactly.
And sometimes one sticks out more than the other.
And it does. And like I said, a lot of times we take those interactions for granted. You walk in and turn on your light switch and assume the light's going to work. Yet, it's absolutely a miracle. The ability to hear sound is a whole other thing. This little tiny bone in our ears that just vibrates and we could hear things. Beautiful music, sounds of birds, sounds of kids, whatever you think is beautiful sounding. We have to remind ourselves that what we get in is just a reminder of His creation. Exactly. So we got to not take that for granted. And unfortunately, a lot of times you take it for granted until you lose it. And then you wish you had it back. So that's always a bad thing. All right, guys. Well, any other comments or questions? Like I said, this is fun for me. Hopefully it is for you. Yes, sir.
Mortal man's greatest desire is to discover an invisible means of support, a spiritual and or mental understanding of what he can call existence. Man's greatest fear is that he will never embrace his greatest desire.
Nice. I don't disagree.
What?
I don't disagree that we fear that we won't get everything we desire, or that what we truly want to understand. Like, Like you said, I want to understand how there's no light.
That's the mortal man's fear, that he won't understand it.
Yeah.
So he's always seeking something.
And if you're not careful, that can lead you away from the truth because you think, oh wait, I see this. This looks really good. I like the way this looks. This fits with what I understand, and then gone.
He's gone.
Yeah.
That's his greatest fear. He can't grasp it.
Yeah.
He wants to grasp it, but he can't.
I just can't get to it. Nice. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
It was great,
Oh, thank y'all.
fascinating.
Well, I hope so. So I appreciate it.
My thought was, Satan, Lucifer,
Mm-hmm.
fell because he wanted to be his own God. So man thinks, I can be my own God.
And then he go straight to Eden. And what did he say? Don't you want to know what God knows? Yes, sir.
And the light in us will get smaller if we don't share it.
Yes. Put a little cover around a candle, and it will snuff itself out. Yeah, good point. So, anyway, guys, we'll go ahead and head on there. We got to get to church, and so thank y'all very much.